In a bustling city, a car dealership stood tall amidst rows of other businesses. The dealership, known as Autotopia Motors, was one of the largest and most popular in the area. It had a reputation for selling luxury cars and offering exceptional customer service. The manager of the dealership, a middle-aged man named Richard, prided himself on running a tight ship. He had been in the business for over 2 decades and considered himself an expert in customer relations. One sunny afternoon, as Richard sat in his office reviewing inventory reports, a new customer walked into the showroom. The man, tall with a calm demeanor, entered dressed in a casual black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. His skin was dark, and he carried himself with an air of quiet confidence. Richard, who had grown accustomed to seeing affluent customers with expensive suits and polished shoes, barely glanced up from his paperwork when the man entered. He had a lot to do and wasn't in the mood for casual inquiries. "Can I help you, sir?" Richard asked, his voice clipped. The man smiled and walked toward Richard's desk. "I'm interested in purchasing a new car," he said. "I'd like to take a look at your premium models." Richard, still distracted by his reports, waved a hand dismissively. He didn't expect the man to be a serious buyer. After all, he didn't look like someone who could afford a luxury vehicle. Richard had seen many people like him come into the dealership, often leaving empty-handed after a few minutes. His focus was on the high-profile clients who typically made big purchases. "We have several options in the backlot, but I'm not sure you're quite in the right category for those kinds of vehicles," Richard said, not realizing the implication of his words. The man's expression remained unchanged, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I believe I am," he said, "but I'd like to see the selection first." Richard raised an eyebrow but motioned toward the showroom floor. He led the man to the display of top-of-the-line cars, sleek sports cars, high-end sedans, and expensive SUVs. The man walked around, inspecting the vehicles with a discerning eye. He paused in front of a particular model, a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class with all the bells and whistles. It gleamed under the showroom lights, its polished exterior reflecting the soft glow. "I'll take this one," the man said after a moment, pointing at the car. Richard blinked, caught off guard. He had not expected this. "Are you sure?" "That's one of our most expensive models," he said, already mentally calculating the potential for a sale, but also wondering if this was just a curious customer looking to waste time. "I'm sure," the man replied, still calm and collected. "Can you prepare the paperwork?" Richard paused for a moment, trying to mask his surprise. He glanced at the man, then back at the car. Despite his earlier judgment, Richard couldn't deny that the man seemed serious. But he still couldn't shake off the feeling that this was some kind of joke. "All right, let me just get the paperwork started for you. But just so we're clear, you'll need to put down a deposit and undergo a credit check. We're a luxury dealership. We don't just sell cars to anyone off the street." The man nodded, his demeanor still unruffled. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "Go ahead and proceed." Richard left the man standing by the car and walked back to his office. As he was pulling up the necessary forms and preparing the background check, he overheard a conversation from the showroom floor. One of the salespeople, a young woman named Karen, was talking to a customer on the phone, arranging a test drive for a high-end vehicle. Richard overheard Karen mention that the new owner of the dealership would be visiting soon. Richard's ears perked up. He'd heard rumors about a potential buyout of Autotopia Motors, but he hadn't given them much thought. He didn't pay attention to the higher-level business dealings. His job was to manage the day-to-day operations. When Richard returned to the showroom to finalize the paperwork for the car sale, he was startled to see a few people in suits standing near the door, talking quietly. One of them was a tall, well-dressed man, someone Richard immediately recognized as a prominent investor in the automotive industry. The investor had a reputation for making high-profile acquisitions, and Richard knew that his company had been in talks with him for a while. "Mr. Richards," the investor called out as he approached. "Good to see you. I wanted to introduce you to the new owner of the dealership." Richard froze. The investor smiled and gestured toward the man who had been quietly inspecting the car in the showroom, the same man in the hoodie and jeans. It took Richard a moment to process the situation. The investor extended his hand toward the man in the hoodie. "Mr. Daniels, this is Richard, the manager of Autotopia Motors." "Richard, I'd like you to meet the new owner." Richard's face turned pale. His mind raced. The man in front of him, the one he had so easily dismissed, was the new owner of the dealership. He was standing in the very showroom that Richard had run for years, the same showroom where Richard had made judgments based on appearance and preconceived notions. Richard's heart skipped a beat as he tried to regain his composure. I didn't realize," he stammered, still in shock. "I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you." Mr. Daniels, the new owner, simply nodded, his expression unchanged. He looked at Richard with a mixture of curiosity and mild amusement. "It's all right," he said calmly. "You can't be expected to know everyone who walks in. But I think we can have a conversation about your approach to customer service." Richard's face flushed with embarrassment. He had assumed, based solely on the man's appearance, that he wasn't a serious buyer. He had let his own biases cloud his judgment, and now he was standing face to face with the person who would own the very dealership he managed. Mr. Daniels turned to the investor. "I'll take it from here," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. "I've got a few things I'd like to discuss with Richard." The investor nodded and smiled. "Of course. I'll leave you two to it. Richard, I'm sure you'll get along fine with Mr. Daniels. He's a good man to work with." The investor turned and left the showroom, leaving Richard alone with the new owner. Richard's mind was still reeling from the shock. He had assumed that Mr. Daniels was just another casual customer, someone who wasn't capable of affording the luxury cars the dealership sold. He couldn't believe how wrong he had been. Mr. Daniels gave Richard a long look before speaking. "Richard, I want to make it clear that my decision to buy this dealership wasn't just about the cars or the profits. It was about the people. I've been watching the way this place operates for a while now. And to be honest, I'm not impressed with the way you treat people." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Mr. Daniels held up a hand. "No need to defend yourself. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to help you understand why this place needs a change. Your biases, your assumptions, they've been affecting how you treat people. And that's something I won't tolerate." Richard's face reddened further, but he stayed silent, realizing the gravity of the situation. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle customers, but now he saw how his actions, based solely on superficial judgments, had been wrong. "You can take a seat if you'd like," Mr. Daniels said, motioning to a chair. "We're going to have a conversation about how things are going to change around here." Richard sat down, his mind still trying to process the events. The man he had so casually dismissed was now in control of his job, and it was clear that things were about to change. He could only hope that he would be able to adapt to the new reality. Mr. Daniels took a deep breath. "You see, Richard, it's not about appearances. It's about respect. It's about treating everyone with the dignity they deserve. I've worked hard to get to where I am, and I won't stand for anyone here treating people based on their looks or assumptions. I expect you to be a leader, not just a manager. And I expect you to lead by example." Richard nodded slowly, his pride wounded but his mind beginning to open. He had learned a hard lesson that day, one that would stay with him for the rest of his career. The world was changing, and he had to change with it. From that moment forward, Richard worked tirelessly to change his ways. He became a more inclusive, thoughtful, and respectful manager, focusing on his customers and employees as individuals, not based on stereotypes or assumptions. And in the process, he helped Autotopia Motors become a dealership that truly served everyone with equal care, no matter their background or appearance. The lesson he learned from the new owner, Mr. Daniels, was simple but profound. Never judge a book by its cover, because sometimes the person you least expect might be the one who changes your life for the better.